What do you think you're doing here? Officer Miller's voice cut through the air, cold and commanding, as he stepped forward, blocking her path. Tasha Williams stood still, her heart racing but her face calm. The cold breeze brushed past her as she glanced up at the towering figure of the officer. She had seen this before, the suspicion, the judgment, the way they looked at her as though she didn't belong. But today, it felt different. The usual unease was replaced by something else, a quiet confidence that grew stronger with every second. Her dog, Rex, stood at her side, silent and still, his dark eyes flickering with an intensity that matched hers. She could sense the officer's unease as his gaze shifted from her to the dog. "I asked you a question?" Officer Miller repeated, his voice rising slightly. Tasha didn't flinch. "I'm just trying to get home," she said calmly, her words steady but firm. "I haven't done anything wrong." The other officers, standing in a tight circle, exchanged glances. One of them, a younger cop with a nervous twitch, took a half-step back as if uncertain. But Officer Miller wasn't backing down. "You're not going anywhere, miss," he declared, stepping closer to her. "We've had complaints. We need to make sure you're not a threat." A flicker of annoyance flashed across Tasha's face, but she kept her voice even. "A threat?" she repeated. "Because I'm walking down the street? Is that a crime now?" The tension in the air thickened, and she could feel the weight of their eyes on her. She knew this was more than just a routine stop. It was the familiar sting of racism, a reminder that, no matter where she went, she could never fully escape it. Rex shifted beside her, his ears twitching as if sensing the rising hostility. Tasha subtly put her hand on his collar, feeling the reassuring warmth of his body beneath her fingers. Rex wasn't just any dog. He had been trained for situations like this, dangerous, unpredictable, moments where she needed protection. She didn't fear the officers. But she wasn't about to let them make her feel small either. "I'm not the one who's a threat here," Tasha said, her voice sharp, as she took a step back, making sure she and Rex had enough space between them and the officers. "Officer." Miller's jaw clenched, and he narrowed his eyes. "Move along." "No," he barked, his patience wearing thin. But before she could take another step, Rex growled low, a deep, resonant sound that seemed to vibrate the air. The officers froze. Tasha's calm demeanor didn't falter. She knew the moment had arrived. Rex wasn't just trained to protect her. He had been trained for moments like this, to sense when the situation was about to escalate, to react when her safety was in jeopardy. "You really don't want to make this worse," Tasha warned quietly, her eyes never leaving Officer Miller's. She could feel the weight of the situation shift. She wasn't backing down. And neither was Rex. The officer hesitated, his eyes flickering between Tasha and the dog, then glanced at his colleagues. The silence stretched on, heavy and thick, as the reality of the standoff set in. Officer Miller took a step back, his expression conflicted. Tasha could see the confusion in his eyes as he realized that, despite his power, he couldn't control this situation the way he was used to. Tasha stood tall, her chin lifted in quiet defiance, while Rex remained motionless, his gaze unwavering. They weren't going anywhere. "Not today." Officer Miller's eyes flickered between Tasha and Rex, his hand twitching towards his holster, unsure whether to make a move. The other officers remained eerily silent, watching the scene unfold. Tasha could feel the weight of the moment, the tension so thick it could suffocate anyone who dared to speak or move. She kept her hand steady on Rex's collar, the warmth of his fur grounding her, a silent reminder of the unspoken bond they shared. Rex was not just a dog, he was her protector, her partner in more ways than one. The officers, clearly uncertain about how to proceed, hesitated, each of them too aware of the implications of escalating the situation further. Tasha didn't back down. She stood her ground, unwavering in her calm demeanor, while Rex continued to stand by her side, alert and poised, his eyes never leaving the officers. She knew this was a game of power and perception. They wanted to see her cower, to see her submit to the weight of their authority. But Tasha wasn't about to give them that satisfaction. The silence stretched on, only broken by the occasional rustling of the wind. Tasha's voice was steady as she spoke again, this time softer, but with an edge that made it clear she wasn't going to be intimidated. "You've made your point," she said. "But I'm not going anywhere." Officer Miller's jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing as he realized he had no immediate way of handling this situation. His mind raced through his options, but none of them seemed to make sense. He was used to having control, to being the one who dictated the terms of the encounter. But here, in front of him, stood a woman who refused to flinch, who wasn't going to let him define her. He took another step forward, and this time, it was clear he was testing the waters. Rex's growl grew louder, a deep rumble that seemed to vibrate through the air. The officers shifted uncomfortably, and for the first time, Tasha saw a flicker of doubt in their eyes. Officer Miller stopped in his tracks, his hand still hovering near his weapon, but he made no move to draw it. He looked over at his colleagues, seeking guidance, but no one dared to speak up. The power dynamic had shifted. Tasha had taken control of the situation, and now, they were the ones who were unsure of how to proceed. "You're making a mistake," Tasha said, her voice calm but firm. She stepped back slightly, keeping herself and Rex at a safe distance from the officers. "I'm not your target. I'm just trying to get home." She could see the wheels turning in Officer Miller's mind. He wanted to react, to assert his dominance, but he couldn't. Not when Rex was standing guard, not when Tasha's steady gaze challenged his every move. Slowly, reluctantly, Officer Miller stepped back, his posture stiff but his gaze never leaving Tasha. He was the one who had been put in his place, and he knew it. The other officers, now looking to him for direction, remained silent. The air was still, the only sound now the soft rustling of leaves and the distant hum of traffic. Tasha felt the tension in her muscles start to ease, but she didn't let her guard down. She knew better than to trust a moment of calm with people like them. Rex, sensing her shift in posture, relaxed slightly but remained alert, still watching the officers with an intensity that mirrored Tasha's own. For a moment, it seemed like the standoff might end in a draw, with either side willing to back down completely. But Tasha knew that the real victory wasn't in forcing the officers to leave, it was in standing her ground, in refusing to let them define her. "You can go now," Tasha said, her voice steady and final. Officer Miller hesitated, his eyes flicking between her and Rex, but in the end, he nodded stiffly, signaling to the other officers to back off. They all turned, retreating from the scene without another word. Tasha stood there for a moment, watching them leave, her chest still tight with the weight of what had just happened. She didn't feel the victory that most people might expect, the triumph of a person who had overcome a challenge. Instead, she felt something more subtle, more personal. She had stood up for herself, and in doing so, she had taken back some of the power that had so often been stripped from her. Rex, sensing the shift in the air, looked up at her, his tail giving a small wag. She reached down to give him a soft pat, a quiet thank you for his loyalty. As she turned to continue on her way, she knew that this encounter wasn't over. But for now, she had won. And that was enough. As Tasha walked away from the scene, her heart began to slow down, the adrenaline of the confrontation with the officers starting to wear off. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the sidewalk, but the quiet calm that followed the tension still hung in the air. Rex trotted by her side, his eyes scanning the surroundings as if still on guard, despite the fact that they were no longer being pursued. Tasha couldn't help but reflect on what had just happened. She had always known that the world was unfair, that she would always face challenges simply because of who she was. But today, she had done something that felt different. She had taken control, stood her ground, and refused to let anyone define her. It wasn't just about the officers or the encounter. It was about reclaiming a sense of agency, a sense of self that had often been taken from her. She had been underestimated countless times before. People saw her as just a black woman, someone who wasn't worthy of respect or consideration. But Rex, with his quiet strength and training, had been a reminder that she wasn't powerless. She wasn't invisible. She had a presence, and when it mattered most, she could make it known. As they continued walking, Tasha's mind drifted to the many times she had been in situations like this, where her worth had been questioned. Whether it was a job interview, a casual encounter on the street, or even a conversation with someone who assumed they knew her based on her appearance, the message was always the same: she didn't belong. But now, with Rex by her side, she felt different. She felt as though she had a voice that couldn't be ignored. Her thoughts were interrupted as they passed a small cafe on the corner. A couple of people sitting outside glanced over at her, and for a moment, Tasha felt the familiar sting of being judged. But this time, she didn't flinch. She walked past them without breaking stride, her head held high, her eyes forward. She wasn't going to let anyone take away the strength she had just discovered in herself. It wasn't about proving anything to anyone else. It was about proving something to herself. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was living. And in that moment, she realized that no matter what anyone else thought of her, she could face whatever came her way. Rex seemed to sense her shift in mood, his tail wagging slightly as he looked up at her. She smiled at him, grateful for his loyalty and the quiet comfort he provided. They had been through a lot together, and in many ways, he was the only one who truly understood her. As they turned the corner onto her street, Tasha felt a sense of peace settle over her. The world hadn't changed, and she knew the struggles would still come. But today, she had taken a stand, and that was enough. She had faced down the judgment, the prejudice, and the assumptions, and she had won. Not because of anything spectacular, but because she had refused to back down. She had refused to let anyone define her, and in that quiet defiance, she had found something stronger than anything else: her own power. The next morning, Tasha woke up early, the sunlight filtering through her curtains and casting a warm glow across the room. She stretched and took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the previous day's events still lingering in her body. But today, it felt different. Today, she wasn't just facing another day of survival. She was facing a day where she could choose to move forward, to continue building on the quiet strength she had discovered in herself. Rex was already awake, sitting by the window, his eyes scanning the street outside. He was always alert, always aware of his surroundings, and Tasha admired that about him. He wasn't just a dog, he was her constant companion, her protector, and her reminder that there was always more to be done than just getting by. As she got dressed and prepared to leave, Tasha thought about the officers from the day before. She knew she hadn't been the only one who had faced their prejudice. She wasn't the only one who had to stand up for herself, to refuse to be intimidated. But something had changed in her. She realized that standing up wasn't just about confronting the immediate challenge. It was about changing the narrative in her own life. She had let go of the fear that had always held her back, the fear that told her she wasn't enough, that she didn't belong. She had faced it, and now it no longer had a hold on her. Tasha grabbed her keys and stepped out of her apartment, Rex trotting along beside her. The morning air was crisp, the streets quiet as the city slowly woke up. She walked with purpose, her steps steady and confident, and Rex matched her pace perfectly. It felt good to walk like this, to feel like she was in control of her own journey, no longer being weighed down by the judgment of others. As she passed by a cafe, she saw a few familiar faces from the neighborhood. People nodded at her, some smiled, and for the first time in a long while, Tasha realized that she had become a part of this place. She wasn't just someone passing through, someone invisible in the crowd. She was someone who belonged here. The thought made her smile to herself, and for a moment she allowed herself to feel proud. She had fought for her place in the world, and now it was hers to claim. When she reached the park, Tasha paused and looked around. The space was quiet, peaceful, with a few early risers jogging or walking their dogs. Rex tugged gently at the leash, eager to explore. As they made their way to the park bench, Tasha sat down and took a deep breath, letting the calm wash over her. It had been a long time since she had allowed herself to just be still, to feel the peace that came with the simple act of being present. As she sat there, watching the world unfold around her, Tasha realized that the journey she had started wasn't just about overcoming the obstacles that others put in her path. It was about embracing the quiet moments, the ones that allowed her to simply exist in her own skin without apology. For the first time, she wasn't rushing to get somewhere or prove anything. She was just being. Rex settled at her feet, lying down with a contented sigh, his head resting on her lap. She ran her fingers through his fur, feeling the warmth of his body and the bond they shared. In that moment, Tasha understood that the journey she had taken wasn't just about finding power in herself. It was about recognizing the power of being at peace with who she was, no matter where life took her. As the days passed, Tasha began to settle into a routine that felt more like her own than ever before. She woke up early each morning, her energy renewed by the quiet strength she had discovered within herself. Each walk with Rex became a moment of reflection, where she could process the events of the past and find peace in the present. She had never imagined that a simple act of standing her ground would lead her to feel so whole, but here she was, stronger than she had ever been. The city around her was busy as usual, people rushing by, cars honking, the hum of life continuing at its usual pace. But for Tasha, the noise felt distant now, like it was no longer hers to claim. She was no longer a part of the chaos. She was above it, at least mentally, and that made all the difference. One morning, as she walked through the neighborhood, she noticed a small gathering in the park. A group of children were playing soccer, laughing and shouting as they ran after the ball. A few adults sat on the benches, enjoying their coffee while watching the game. Tasha paused for a moment, her eyes scanning the scene. She recognized a few faces in the crowd, but there was something different now. For the first time in a long while, she felt like she belonged here. It wasn't just about the quiet confidence she had gained from her confrontation with the officers. It was about something deeper, a sense of peace, a sense of place, that had been missing from her life for far too long. She had spent so many years trying to fit into spaces that never truly accepted her. But now, she realized, she didn't need their approval. She was enough as she was. Rex tugged gently on the leash, pulling her out of her thoughts. She smiled at him and continued walking, heading toward the small cafe she had passed by earlier in the week. The smell of fresh coffee and pastries filled the air as she stepped inside, and the familiar sound of the espresso machine humming softly made her feel right at home. She ordered a black coffee, sitting down by the window with Rex at her feet. The cafe was quiet, and as she sipped her drink, Tasha couldn't help but feel grateful for the stillness. It was rare to have a moment like this, a moment where everything felt right, where she didn't have to rush or worry about what was coming next. She had learned to embrace these moments, to find comfort in the small things that others often overlooked. The sound of the door chiming as someone entered brought her out of her thoughts, and she glanced up. A man walked in, tall with a broad build, wearing a suit that looked a little too formal for the casual cafe. He glanced around the room before his eyes landed on Tasha. She wasn't sure if it was the way he looked at her or just the way he stood there, but something about him made her feel uncomfortable. She didn't like the way he was studying her, almost as if he were measuring her. She turned her attention back to her coffee, not wanting to make eye contact, but it was hard to ignore the feeling that he was still watching her. After a moment he moved to the counter to order, and Tasha let out a quiet breath of relief. It was then that she realized something important. The discomfort she felt wasn't because of him. It was because of her. She had spent so many years being hyper-aware of the way people looked at her, the way they judged her, that she had forgotten how to simply exist without worrying about their perception. Today, she had the power to let it go. She didn't have to let anyone's gaze make her feel small. She wasn't just surviving anymore, she was living. As she finished her coffee and prepared to leave, Tasha realized that every day was a new opportunity to claim her place in the world. No one could take that from her. Rex stood up and nudged her leg, and with one last look at the man who had walked into the cafe, Tasha stepped out into the sunlight. She wasn't looking over her shoulder anymore. She didn't need to. The following week, Tasha found herself walking with a new sense of purpose. The quiet confidence she had built over the past days, weeks, and months felt more solid than ever before. She had started to feel like her own person again, like she wasn't just a reflection of other people's expectations or judgments. Each step she took in the bustling city streets, with Rex by her side, felt like a step toward a future she could finally own. The weight of past insecurities, the fear of being judged, had lessened. She was no longer at the mercy of the opinions of others. It wasn't that she didn't care what people thought. It was that she had come to realize that she was enough just as she was. Her walk that morning took her past the park, where the kids were playing soccer again. This time, instead of feeling like an outsider looking in, she felt a part of it. She saw the joy in their faces, the simple freedom they had to just be, and for the first time in a long while, Tasha smiled. It was a smile that came from a place of knowing that life wasn't about trying to be someone else. It was about being true to who you were. As she continued walking, she passed the small cafe she had become so familiar with. This time, there were no uncomfortable stares or glances from strangers. There was only the gentle hum of the world continuing on, and Tasha felt perfectly at ease with it. Rex, ever loyal, trotted beside her, his eyes scanning the streets with his usual vigilance, but even he seemed to sense the shift in her. They were both in a different place now. Tasha felt more at peace with herself, and Rex seemed to radiate the same calm assurance. It wasn't long before she made her way to the library, where she had started to spend her mornings. The quiet space, surrounded by books, was a refuge for her. It was a place where she could read, reflect, and reconnect with the thoughts and dreams she had set aside for too long. The librarian, a kind woman named Mrs. Harris, always greeted her with a warm smile. "Morning, Tasha," Mrs. Harris said as Tasha walked in. "How's Rex doing?" Tasha smiled back, feeling a sense of warmth wash over her. "He's doing great," she replied, her voice full of affection as she patted Rex's head. Mrs. Harris chuckled softly. "I'm glad. He's a good dog, keeps everyone here on their toes." Tasha laughed, taking a seat at one of the quiet tables in the back of the library. As she settled in with a book, the world outside seemed to fade away. The silence of the library, the turning of pages, the rustle of Rex's paws on the floor as he lay at her feet, all of it felt like the perfect moment. There was no rush, no pressure. Just time to breathe, to think and to be. The past was behind her, the future still uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, Tasha felt okay with that. She wasn't in a hurry anymore. She didn't need to prove anything. All she needed to do was keep moving forward, one step at a time. She had learned the power of standing still, of letting things unfold naturally. And as she looked up from her book, her gaze resting on Rex, she realized that she had everything she needed right here: peace, purpose, and the quiet strength to face whatever came next. Life was no longer something to fear. It was something to embrace. Tasha's life had settled into a rhythm that felt right. She was no longer rushing, no longer waiting for someone else's approval. She woke up each morning with a sense of purpose, even if that purpose was simply to take care of herself, to be present in the moment. Rex, as always, was by her side, his steady presence offering her a sense of peace she hadn't known she needed. Every walk with him was a quiet reminder that she wasn't alone. The neighborhood around her was changing, too. There was a new energy in the air, a sense that things were moving forward, that people were starting to notice the little details they had once overlooked. As Tasha walked through the park one afternoon, she noticed the familiar faces of her neighbors nodding at her as they passed. The old woman who lived on the corner, who always gave her a knowing smile, stopped to chat with her for a moment. "You seem different," she said, her voice soft but kind. "In a good way." Tasha smiled, not sure how to respond at first. But as she looked into the woman's eyes, she realized that she didn't need to explain herself. The shift in her was clear, even to those around her. "I feel different," Tasha replied, the words coming easily. "I think I'm finally figuring things out." The woman nodded, as if she understood exactly what Tasha meant. "It's about time," she said with a wink, before continuing on her way. Tasha watched her for a moment before continuing her walk. The small interaction, though simple, had given her a sense of warmth she hadn't expected. She had come to realize that she didn't have to change the world to feel like she was making progress. She didn't have to prove anything to anyone. Every little step she took, every moment she chose to stand her ground, was enough. That was where her power lay. In the quiet moments of choosing herself, even when the world around her continued to rush by. As she turned the corner and made her way back home, Tasha noticed a new store opening up down the street. It was a small business, but there was something about it that caught her eye. She walked over, curious, and as she peered inside, she saw a sign that said, "Local artisans wanted." Something inside her stirred. It had been a long time since she had done anything for herself, something just because she wanted to. She had always put others first, always thought of her responsibilities before her own desires. But now, as she looked at that sign, she realized that it was time for a change. Maybe it was time to explore her own creativity, to try something new. She wasn't sure what it would look like yet, but for the first time, she didn't feel the need to have everything figured out. She was content in the knowledge that she could explore, try, and fail without fear. The possibilities felt endless. Rex, as if sensing the shift in her, looked up at her with his usual steady gaze, his tail wagging slightly. She smiled at him, knowing that whatever came next, she wasn't facing it alone. Tasha continued on her way, not sure what the future would hold, but ready to embrace it with open arms. There was peace in that, in knowing that she was enough, just as she was, and that the journey ahead was hers to walk at her own pace. Tasha had come a long way since that first defining moment, standing her ground against the officers, but she knew the journey wasn't over. It wasn't just about one victory. It wasn't about one encounter. It was about the ongoing process of finding herself, of growing into the person she had always been meant to be. She had spent so much time carrying the weight of other people's expectations and assumptions, but now, she felt the freedom to let that go, little by little. It was a slow process, but it was one she could see taking shape every day. The city around her continued to move at its usual pace, people rushing by, the hum of cars and chatter filling the streets. But for the first time, Tasha wasn't lost in the noise. She was right here, in the moment, walking at her own pace, with Rex beside her, and the world around her seemed to fade into the background. One afternoon, as she walked to the park, Tasha saw a group of people gathered by the fountain, chatting and laughing together. It wasn't anything extraordinary, but for some reason, the scene caught her attention. The warmth of the moment, the shared smiles and the sense of connection, made her realize something important. She had always kept to herself, always been a bit of an outsider, but now, she could feel the pull of community. It wasn't about fitting into some ideal of what she should be or who she should know. It was about the people she could connect with, the genuine relationships that didn't need to be forced or manufactured. She had started to make those connections, little by little, finding herself surrounded by people who respected her for who she was, not for what they expected her to be. As she approached the group near the fountain, she recognized one of the faces. It was Mrs. Harris, the librarian, who had become a familiar presence in her life. Mrs. Harris waved at her with a warm smile, and Tasha felt a rush of comfort. It was strange, how a simple greeting from someone who genuinely cared could make her feel like she was part of something. She walked over to the bench where Mrs. Harris was sitting, and Rex, ever the social one, immediately lay down beside her. "Hey, Tasha," Mrs. Harris said, her voice full of kindness. "How's it going?" Tasha smiled, feeling a sense of ease she hadn't experienced in a long time. "It's going good," she replied. "I've been thinking a lot lately." Mrs. Harris raised an eyebrow in curiosity. "About what?" Tasha paused, choosing her words carefully. "About how I've spent so much of my life trying to fit into places that didn't really matter. But now, I think I'm learning to embrace the moments that do. I don't need to try so hard anymore." Mrs. Harris nodded, her expression thoughtful. "That's a beautiful realization, Tasha. It's not about fitting into someone else's idea of you. It's about creating your own space in the world." Tasha looked over at the group, who had continued their conversation but now glanced over at her with friendly smiles. For the first time, she didn't feel like an outsider. She didn't feel like she was trying to prove anything. She was simply herself, and that was enough. "You're right," Tasha said, her voice soft but filled with a quiet conviction. "It's time to stop running from who I really am." Mrs. Harris smiled at her, the wisdom in her eyes evident. "And you'll find your way, Tasha. In your own time, in your own way." As Tasha sat there, watching the people around her, she realized that everything had been leading to this moment. She had spent so much of her life living for others, trying to fit into places and spaces that didn't align with who she was. But now, with every step, with every choice, she was carving out her own path. She wasn't waiting for permission anymore. She wasn't asking for approval. She was simply living. And that was enough. Tasha's days began to flow into one another with a quiet grace. She had grown accustomed to the peaceful rhythm of her new life, where every step she took felt purposeful and each decision was made from a place of inner strength. Rex remained by her side, his loyalty unwavering, a constant presence that reminded her of the quiet power of companionship. It had taken time for Tasha to learn that peace wasn't something she had to chase. It was something she could create within herself. She didn't need to run anymore. She didn't need to hide behind her fears or anxieties. She was enough as she was. As the weeks passed, Tasha found herself meeting more people from her community. She had started attending the local market on Saturdays, where vendors sold fresh produce, handmade crafts, and other goods. It wasn't a big event, but it was one that allowed her to connect with others, to talk, to listen, and to be a part of something. One Saturday, as she strolled through the market with Rex walking by her side, she stopped at a stall that sold handmade candles. The woman behind the table greeted her with a friendly smile. "Can I help you find something?" she asked. Tasha smiled back, her eyes scanning the rows of candles in various colors and scents. "Just looking," Tasha replied. The woman chuckled. "Take your time. You're welcome to browse." As Tasha lingered at the stall, smelling the different scents and reading the labels, she realized that she had become someone who was learning to enjoy the small moments. She wasn't rushing to go anywhere anymore. She didn't need to hurry through life just to feel like she was moving forward. She was already there. After a few minutes, she picked out a lavender-scented candle, the calming fragrance filling the air around her. She turned to the woman, who had been watching her with a quiet interest. "I'll take this one," Tasha said, her voice soft but confident. The woman nodded, wrapping the candle carefully. "I think you'll enjoy it," she said with a smile. As Tasha paid for the candle and made her way back to the street, she realized how much she had changed. Not just in how she moved through the world, but in how she viewed herself. She wasn't chasing after something to prove her worth. She wasn't waiting for someone else to tell her she mattered. She knew she mattered, and that was all that mattered. Rex trotted happily alongside her, his tail wagging as they made their way home. Tasha took a deep breath, letting the calm of the day settle over her. Life wasn't perfect, but it was hers, and for the first time in a long while, she was at peace with that. As she reached her apartment, she unlocked the door and stepped inside, the familiar scent of lavender filling the air. She placed the candle on the windowsill, watching the light dance as the sun began to set. It was a small, simple moment, but it felt like everything had come together. She didn't need anything else to feel complete. She was whole just as she was.